The royal court gave Liora Fen the Widow Wreath because weak hands looked guilty carrying death. They made her stand at the mouth of the wedding aisle in a rain-damp grey servant dress, both arms trembling beneath a circle of black roots, white funeral lilies, and thorn vines tied with widow silk. The wreath was heavy enough to drag pain into her wrists. Every time she shifted her grip, the thorns pricked her palms and drank the smallest beads of blood. The court saw only the shaking. Weak Liora, pale Liora. Death touched Liora Fen, the servant girl who fainted during wolf drills, who could not carry a water barrel across the west yard without stopping twice, who had once been found crying beside a dead raven and blamed for the omen because grief looked suspicious on poor faces. Now she stood beneath the moon-glass chandeliers of Ravencairn Keep, while the royal wedding waited for her to carry death through the hall. At the far end of the aisle stood the grave altar, a black marble slab used in royal weddings to honor the dead before vows were spoken. Liora was supposed to carry the widow wreath to the altar, lay it down, bow, and disappear. Instead, every noble watched as if she had already poisoned the candles by breathing. "Careful," Lady Ysmera Voss said softly from beside the throne steps. "It would be unfortunate if she dropped it before His Majesty arrives." A ripple of laughter moved through the court. Ysmera did not laugh. She never needed to. Her cruelty wore silk, not teeth. She stood in a white bridal gown threaded with silver, her pale gold hair braided beneath a crown of tiny black pearls. Around her throat rested a mourning necklace made of polished raven stones, each one carved with the name of a dead noblewoman who had supposedly blessed the marriage by dying before it. No one said it that way. They called those deaths fate, fever, falling ice, river fog, wolf sickness, bridal grief. Liora had scrubbed the floors after 3 of those funerals. She remembered the smell of funeral lilies too well. She remembered one mother pressing her mouth into a black veil so the court would not hear her break. Then Lady Ysmera stepped closer. "You understand the honor, don't you, Liora?" Liora kept her eyes lowered. "Yes, my lady. To carry the widow wreath at a royal wedding is not punishment." No one openly smiled. They wanted her to answer. "It is an honor," Liora said. Ysmera's eyes warmed with satisfaction. "Good girl." The words landed like a hand pressing the back of Liora's neck. She tightened her fingers around the wreath. A thorn slid deeper into her palm. The roots moved. Only a little. Liora froze. The black vines beneath the lilies flexed against her skin, not dead at all, but sleeping. A faint pulse traveled through the circle, slow, hungry, like something buried underground hearing rain for the first time in years. One drop of her blood touched a white funeral lily. The petal darkened at the edge. Liora's stomach turned cold. She had seen that once before. At her mother's burial, when a grave root rose through frozen soil and curled around Liora's finger while the priest called her mother's death a fever, she had screamed. The priest slapped her quiet and told the mourners that grief made sick children imagine things. Weak girls who saw roots move were not protected. They were buried beside them. The hall doors opened. Every wolf in the room lowered its head. Alpha King Vaelric Dravane entered in black wedding armor. He wore no white. No king of Ravencairn ever did. His armor was dark iron chased with silver claw marks, his cloak lined in black wolf fur, his hair dark as stormwood beneath a narrow crown. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and beautiful in the merciless way of a blade left in moonlight. His eyes were pale amber, wolf-bright, and unreadable. The court bowed. Ysmera lowered herself gracefully. Liora tried to bow too. The wreath would not let her. The roots clenched around her fingers and held her upright. A few nobles gasped. Vaelric's gaze stopped on her. Not on the wreath. On her face. That was worse. People usually looked at the weakness first. The trembling hands, the thin wrists, the skin too pale after long days below stairs. Vaelric looked as if he had heard something in her silence. "Why is the servant holding the widow wreath?" he asked. His voice did not rise. The hall still felt struck. Ismera answered smoothly. A small sorrow touched the wedding night, my king. Liora prepared the chamber linens before Lady Odrian passed in her sleep. The court thought it proper that she carry the wreath to the grave altar. Liora heard how cleanly Ismera said passed, but Liora had seen Lady Odrian that morning, black beneath the nails, mouth stained faintly purple. No peaceful sleep. Poison had a smell if one scrubbed enough death rooms. Vaelric's eyes narrowed. Did you ask to carry it? Leora's throat tightened. A careful answer might save her. A truthful answer might bury her. The wreath pulsed against her bloody palms. No, she said. The court went silent. Ismera's smile did not move, but something behind it sharpened. High Mourner Sable raised his black-sleeved hands. Majesty, death omens must be carried before they settle. Settle where? Vaelric asked. Sable's gaze slid to Liora. Where they began. There it was. Neatly done. If the marriage failed, she would be the omen. If another woman died, she would be the shadow that brought it. If the Alpha King's bond never awakened, no one would look at the bride. Vaelric stepped down from the dais. Every noble stiffened. He stopped before Liora and looked at the thorns piercing her palms. Your hands are bleeding. Liora almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because in a hall full of wedding death, poison, false mourning, and a funeral wreath breathing against her skin, the Alpha King had noticed the smallest wound first. It is only a thorn, Majesty. His gaze returned to hers. Only is a word people use when they want pain to stay useful. The words struck too close. Ismera moved down the aisle. My king, the rite should not be delayed. The dead must be honored before vows are spoken. At the word vows, the wreath tightened. Liora gasped. Black roots slid across her wrists. Vaelric's hand went to his sword. High Mourner Sable paled. Do not touch the wreath, Majesty. Widow root binds to the nearest grief. If disturbed, it may take a living throat. Ismera softened her voice. Then let the girl finish. She looks faint. Weak Liora. Useful Liora. Easy to rush before anyone noticed the wreath was not pulling toward the altar. It was pulling away from it. Vaelric saw the direction of the roots. His eyes followed one black vine as it slipped from the wreath and touched the polished floor. It stretched not toward the grave altar, but toward the bridal dais, toward Ismera. The Alpha King's expression changed. Only slightly, enough for Liora to see danger wake. Carry it, he said. Ismera's smile returned. Vaelric lowered his voice so only Liora could hear. Slowly. That single word changed the command. Not obedience. Permission to witness. Liora stepped forward. The wreath grew colder in her arms. The first step sent pain through her palms. The second made the lilies blacken at the center. The third drew whispers from the roots. Lady Odrian, Serave, Nimele Ash, Corvadern, dead women. Women brought near the king as alliance daughters, noble guests, bloodline candidates. Women who died before vows could ever be spoken. Leora's legs shook. The court thought she was failing. She was listening. The grave altar waited ahead. The wreath pulled harder towards Ismera. High Mourner Sable's face went pale. Ismera saw it too. For the first time, her bridal calm flickered. Careful, girl, she said. Liora stopped 2 steps before the altar. The wreath went still. Every candle in the hall bent sideways. Liora whispered, It does not want the dead. Ismera's voice cut soft and sharp. What did you say? Liora looked at the black wreath in her bloody hands. The roots opened like fingers. It wants who gained from them. The widow wreath tore itself from her grasp. Nobles screamed. Black roots lashed through the air, scattering funeral lilies like bone-white feathers. The wreath flew past the grave altar, past the priest, past the wedding candles, straight toward the bride. Ismera lifted one hand. Too late. The widow wreath wrapped around her throat. Every raven stone on her mourning necklace cracked at once, and from inside the black roots, a dead woman's voice whispered, She invited us to die. She invited us to die. The dead woman's whisper moved through Ravencairn Keep like cold breath under a locked door. No one screamed at first. The court was too stunned. The widow wreath had wrapped itself around Lady Ismera Voss's throat, black roots crossing the white skin above her bridal necklace. Funeral lilies dropped from it one by one, their petals turning grey before they touched the floor. Every raven stone at Ismera's neck cracked with a sound like tiny bones breaking. From the first stone rose a face of smoke. Lady Odrienne. Her lips were faintly purple. Her eyes were open in the terrible way of someone who had woken inside her own death and found the room already prepared to call it sleep. Ismera clawed at the roots. "Get it off me." High Mourner Sable rushed forward, black sleeves flaring. "Do not listen. Widow root carries grief, not judgment. It repeats fear, nothing more." The wreath tightened. Ismera Chokil. Alpha King Vaelric Dravane stepped down from the aisle with his hand on his sword. The room bent around him. Even the candles seemed to lean away from his anger. "Then let grief repeat clearly," he said. Sable stopped. Liora Fen stood 2 steps from the grave altar, both palms bleeding where the wreath had torn free. Her wrist still trembled from its weight. The court stared at her as if she had thrown the roots herself. She had not. That was what frightened her. The wreath was not obeying her. It had only used her blood to wake. Lady Odrienne's smoky face turned toward Vaelric. "Not sleep," she whispered. A murmur broke through the nobles. Ismera's eyes flashed. "My king, this is grave. Madness." My aunt was old. Her heart failed. The smoke face opened its mouth again. "No. One word. One wound." Liora felt it in her palms. Beneath the polished stones, beneath the wedding hall, beneath old burial vaults and root-dark soil, something answered. Thin black threads stirred underground, not reaching for corpses, but for the living hands that had profited from them. Liora swayed. Vaelric noticed at once. Not Ismera's beauty, not the court's panic. Her. "Can you stand?" he asked. The question struck harder than mockery. No one asked weak girls if they could stand. They watched them fall and named it proof. Liora forced breath into her lungs. Barely. A faint change crossed his face. Respect, perhaps. Small. Dangerous. Ismera saw it too. "My king," she said softly, forcing pain into grace. "On our wedding day, a servant girl and a funeral wreath accused me with smoke. Is that all it takes to stain your bride?" The court wanted that to be true. Liora could feel it. They wanted the old shape back, a fragile bride attacked by omen, a weak servant at the center of death, a priest to explain the rest. Vaelric did not take the shape offered. "Who ordered Liora to carry the wreath?" he asked. Silence. His pale amber eyes moved to Sable. The High Mourner bowed his head. The rite required a bearer touched by the omen. "Who named her touched?" Sable's mouth opened. The wreath answered first. A black root loosened from Ismera's throat and slid across the air toward Sable's sleeve. He jerked back, but the root snapped around his wrist and pulled something from beneath the cuff. A small silver pin fell onto the marble. It was shaped like a funeral lily. Its tip was stained purple. Leora's stomach went cold. Widowberry. She had scrubbed that color from bowls after quiet deaths. She had smelled it under incense, under rosewater, under funeral wax. Vaelric crouched and lifted the pin with the edge of his dagger. "Explain," he said. Sable's face drained of color. "A mourner's tool. For poison? For ritual oil." Lady Odrienne's face drifted closer to him. He brought the cup. Sable flinched. Too late. The court saw. Ismera saw. And for the first time since the wreath had seized her, true fear touched her eyes. Not fear of dying. Fear of being followed. Another ravenstone cracked. A younger woman's face rose from the smoke, dark hair tangled with river weeds. Liora knew her. "Sarah Vey," she whispered. The court had called Sarah's death River Fog. A pretty lie, a soft lie. The kind nobles preferred because it did not stain anyone's hands. The dead woman's mouth moved. Not fog. The wedding hall seemed to grow colder around the words. Vaelric's jaw tightened. How many? He asked. No one answered. The wreath did. More roots opened across Ysmera's throat, revealing thin silver threads trapped beneath the black vines. Each thread led from a cracked raven stone to the bridal crown on Ysmera's head. Dead women. Dead chances. Dead paths cleared before the wedding. Liora did not understand all of it yet. She only understood the first law beating through the roots. Widow Root did not seek the dead. It sought the gain. It wants who benefited, she said. Ysmera's gaze snapped to her. The hatred there was sudden and naked. Weak Liora had been useful. Listening Liora was not. Savel lunged. Vaelric moved before the priest crossed half a step. His sword flashed once. Savel's poisoned pin spun from his sleeve and struck the grave altar, bursting into purple flame. The court recoiled, but Ysmera used the moment. She tore one cracked raven stone from her necklace and crushed it in her palm. Black smoke exploded outward. The wreath convulsed around her throat, then snapped loose like a living noose cut from its prey. For one breath, Ysmera staggered free, blood at her neck and fury in her eyes. Then every root turned toward Liora. Vaelric reached for her. The roots reached faster. The widow wreath wrapped around Leora's bleeding wrists. Pain shot up her arms. The dead women's faces turned as one, and every voice in the hall whispered, "Root, blood, root blood." The word passed through the hall like a grave opening under clean marble. Liora had heard insults before. Weak, omen, death touched. Useless. But this word did not sound like an insult. It sounded like recognition. The widow wreath coiled around her bleeding wrists, black roots tightening over the cuts left by its thorns. Pain climbed her arms in cold lines. Not fire. Not poison. Something older. Something that felt like being pulled downward through soil that remembered every buried name. Liora tried to pull free. The roots tightened. She bit back a cry. Vaelric moved toward her at once. High Mourner Savel shouted, "Do not touch her." The Alpha King stopped with one hand half raised. Savel's face was pale, but his voice sharpened with sudden purpose. Root blood binds through grief. If His Majesty touches her while the wreath is awake, it may fasten to his breath, to his wolf, to his bond. The court recoiled at the last word. Bond. That was the word no one had wanted spoken on the wedding morning. Ysmera stood near the bridal dais, one hand pressed to the bloody marks around her throat. Her perfect white gown had been torn by roots, but even wounded she understood how to turn fear towards someone else. "You hear him," she whispered. "The servant is not carrying an omen. She is the omen." Liora looked at her. The roots around her wrists pulsed. Every dead woman's smoky face turned toward Ysmera again. The bride flinched before she could hide it. Vaelric saw. His pale amber eyes narrowed. "If she is the omen, why does it keep looking at you?" A hush fell. Ysmera's expression softened into hurt. "Because she has made it look at me. I saw the roots move before she did. Because her blood woke them." Liora forced herself to breathe through the pain. "I did not know what it was." Ysmera's eyes flashed. "Yet, you named what it wanted." "No," Liora said. "It showed me." The wreath tightened again. A root slid from her wrist down to the floor, dragging a line of her blood across the white stone. The blood did not spread. It sank between the cracks of the marble as if the keep itself were drinking. Beneath the hall, something answered. A soft creak. Then another. The grave altar trembled. The black marble slab split along one corner, and from the crack rose a single root, pale as bone. It curled toward Leora's blood, then turned sharply toward the bridal dais, toward Ysmera's feet. Savel stepped in front of the root. "Enough. This is forbidden gravecraft. Majesty, the girl must be removed before the wedding hall becomes a burial pit." Vaelric's voice went cold. "Removed where?" "To the root crypts below the keep. Leora's blood turned colder than the wreath. Everyone in Ravencairn knew the root crypts. Servants whispered of them in winter, when old pipes groaned and black vines pressed through the lower stones. Bodies that caused political difficulty were not burned there. They were lowered beneath widow root and never spoken of again. Weak girls did not return from places built to keep secrets quiet. Vaelric looked at Savel. You reach too quickly for a crypt. Savel bowed. I reach for safety. No, Liora whispered. Her voice was small, but the wreath heard. The root around her wrist loosened by a breath. She lifted her head. You reach for the place where no one can hear the dead. Savel's jaw tightened. Ysmera stepped down from the dais, blood still marking her throat like a necklace she had not chosen. My king, look at her. She speaks with grave root. Dead women answer her. She bleeds into the floor and wakes the altar. If she remains, your vows will be poisoned before they are spoken. Vaelric did not look away from Liora. What happens if I touch the wreath? He asked. Savel answered too quickly. Your wolf breath may be bound. The phrase struck the court into stillness. Liora saw pain flicker across Vaelric's face, hidden almost before it appeared. Wolf breath. Not life, not soul. The first breath of a true mate bond, when an alpha's wolf recognized the one blood it would follow beyond crown law. So the rumors were true. The Alpha King's bond had never awakened. Not for Ysmera. Not for any bride before her. And every woman brought close enough to test it had died. Liora understood only pieces, but the pieces were sharp. Ysmera understood that Liora understood. Her voice turned soft. She is already inside your grief, my king. That is what root blood does. It slips through pity and makes men mistake danger for innocence. Vaelric's expression hardened. For one breath, Liora thought he believed her. Then he drew his sword. The court sighed with relief. Liora did not move. She had nowhere to go. Vaelric turned the blade and drove it point first into the marble between Liora and Ysmera. Silver light spread from the steel, making a narrow boundary across the floor. No one takes her to the crypts, he said. Ysmera went still. Savel's mouth tightened. Majesty. No one touches the wreath. No one moves the servant. No wedding vow is spoken until the dead finish the sentence they began. Liora stared at him. He had not freed her. He had not chosen her. But he had stopped them from burying her. For now, that was enough to keep breathing. The widow wreath pulsed around her wrists. The smoky faces of the dead women gathered closer, circling Liora like candle smoke before storm wind. Lady Audrian lifted one translucent hand and pointed toward the grave altar. The split marble opened wider. Inside the altar, hidden beneath the wedding flowers, lay a small black bowl stained purple at the rim. Widowberry. Savel staggered back. Ysmera's face went blank. The dead women whispered together, not loud, but clear enough for every wolf in the hall to hear. First cup. Vaelric looked from the poisoned bowl to his bride. His voice dropped to something darker than anger. Whose first cup? The widow wreath tightened around Leora's wrists until blood ran freely down her fingers, and the altar answered in a dead bride's voice. The first woman who almost woke his wolf. The first woman who almost woke his wolf. The words came from inside the grave altar. Not from smoke, not from roots, from stone. The wedding hall did not move for one long breath. Then every candle bent toward the black bowl hidden beneath the flowers, its rim stained purple with widowberry poison. Vaelric stared at it as if the bowl had opened a wound he had spent years pretending was only silence. Name her, he said. The altar answered. Nimele, Ash. A murmur passed through the court. Liora knew that name. Everyone did, though most had learned to speak it softly. Nimel Ash had been the first noble daughter brought to Ravencairn after Vaelric became king. She was not called a bride. Not yet. Only a bloodline guest, a winter alliance. A possible bond match. 3 nights later, she died before breakfast. The court called it fever. The widow wreath tightened around Leora's wrists. Pain pulled her forward. She tried to stop, but the roots dragged her closer to the grave altar until her knees struck the marble. Blood from her fingers dripped onto the split stone. The hall vanished. She stood inside a candlelit chamber years earlier, seeing through the memory of roots hidden beneath the floor. Nimel Ash sat at a small table in a pale blue gown, hands folded around a silver cup. She was young, composed, frightened enough to hide it well. Across the room, a younger Vaelric stood near the window, tense and silent, his black wolf shadow sleeping at his feet like a thing wounded too deeply to rise. Nimel looked at him. "Your wolf heard me." Vaelric turned. His shadow wolf opened one amber eye. The room trembled. Then the door opened. Lady Ismera Voss entered carrying a tray. She was younger too, not yet wearing a bridal crown, only a white mourning ribbon in her hair. Her smile was gentle enough to be trusted. "For your nerves," she said, setting the silver cup before Nimel. Nimel hesitated. Ismera's eyes flicked to Vaelric's wolf shadow. It had lifted its head. The memory tightened. Nimel had drunk. The wolf shadow collapsed first. Then Nimel's hen flew to her throat. The vision shattered. Liora gasped back into the wedding hall, doubled over the altar, the wreath digging into her wrists. "Nimel did not have fever," she whispered. Ismera's voice cut across the silence. "A servant cannot remember a death that happened before she came to the keep." Liora lifted her head. "No, but roots can." The court recoiled. High Mourner Savel raised both hands. "Forbidden gravecraft. She admits it." Vaelric did not look at him. His eyes were fixed on Ysmera. "You brought Nimel the cup." Ismera's face had gone pale, but not broken. "I brought many cups. I was a lady of mourning service then. I comforted guests, your silence frightened. My wolf woke for her." "For a breath," Ismera said. Then it slept again, as it always did. The words were too sharp, too close to confession. Vaelric stepped toward her. The Widow Wreath convulsed around Leora's wrists, and she cried out despite herself. Vaelric stopped immediately. Ysmera saw it. So did Savel. Liora understood the trap before she understood the rule. Every time Vaelric moved against Ysmera, the wreath punished Liora. Not because the wreath wanted to hurt her, but because Ysmera had tied the dead women's silenced proof to the weakest living root blood in the hall. Savel smiled faintly. "You see, Majesty, the girl is bound to the accusation, pushed too hard, and she breaks." Vaelric's amber eyes went cold. Liora breathed through the pain. "Then do not push." He looked at her. She forced herself upright, wrists bleeding freely into the black roots. "Ask." Vaelric understood. Slowly, he turned back to the altar, not to Ysmera. Who gained from Nimel Ash's death? The black bowl cracked. Purple fire rose from its rim, shaping itself into a thin silver thread. The thread stretched from Nimel's name inside the altar to Ysmera's mourning necklace, then to the bridal crown. The court saw. Ysmera's lips parted. Liora whispered, "Not grief." The dead women answered, "Position." The word struck the hall like a verdict. Ysmera lifted her chin. "Position is not murder." "No," Vaelric said quietly. "But poison is." For the first time, Lady Ysmera Voss looked at him with hatred she did not bother to hide. The Widow Wreath loosened around Leora's wrists by a breath. Not mercy. Approval. Then a second name bled through the altar stone. Seravi. Wet river weeds curled up through the crack, and from far beneath Ravencairn Keep, water began to rise. Water rose beneath Ravencairn Keep. At first, it was only a sound. A hollow rush under the marble, a soft, impossible current moving where no river should have been. Then the cracks around the grave altar darkened, and cold water seeped upward through the stone, carrying strands of riverweed and the faint smell of drowned earth. The nobles stepped back. Liora could not. The Widow Wreath held her wrists above the split altar, black roots drinking her blood drop by drop. The water touched her knees through the torn grey cloth of her dress, and the cold went straight into her bones. Serave's name glowed beneath the rising water. Vaelric stared at it. She drowned outside the south bridge. High Mourner Savel answered too quickly. River fog took her. Everyone knows that. The water stilled. Then a dead woman laughed. Not loudly, bitterly. A face rose from the shallow flood, made of black water and pale moonlight. Serave looked younger than Liora expected, with dark hair plastered to her cheeks and river weeds tangled around her throat. Not fog, she whispered. The hall vanished. Liora stood on a bridge at night, seeing through the memory of roots that had grown along the riverbank. Rain fell in silver lines. Serave stood near the railing in a dark traveling cloak, one hand pressed to her chest. Across from her stood Vaelric, younger, colder, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His wolf shadow lingered behind him, faint but awake, watching Sarah with one amber eye. "You hear it too," Sarah said. Vaelric did not answer, but his hand moved to his chest. A thin silver thread glowed between them, no thicker than spider silk. Then Ismera stepped from the bridge arch. Not in bridal white, in morning black. "Sarah," she said gently, "you should not meet the king alone at night. People will make cruel stories." Sarah turned. "His wolf called me." Ismera's smile changed. "Only a little. Enough for Liora to see the blade beneath it. Then we must make sure it never calls wrong." The river rose. Not naturally. Hands made of water gripped Sarah's ankles. Sarah reached for Vaelric, but a raven stone in Ysmera's palm flared black. Vaelric's wolf shadow staggered as if struck through the breath. The silver thread between him and Sarah snapped. Sarah fell backward over the rail. The memory ended with the sound of water closing over her mouth. Liora came back choking. The wedding hall swam before her eyes. River water now covered the floor around the altar. The hem of Ismera's white gown darkened where the flood touched it, but the bride did not move. She watched Liora, not the water, not Sarah's ghost. Liora. Because Liora had seen the hand. She pushed her, Liora whispered. Ismera's face went still. Vaelric's eyes lifted slowly. "Sarah reached for me," he said. His voice had changed. Low. Haunted. "I thought I dreamed that." Sarah's water ghost turned toward him. "You were made to forget the reaching." The words hit him harder than accusation. For one breath. The Alpha King looks not powerful, not untouchable, but robbed. A man standing among all the moments where his wolf had almost woken, and finding only graves where answers should have been. Then his face shut, dangerously. Ismera saw it, and struck first. "My king," she said, voice breaking beautifully. "How many women must this servant drag from their graves before you see what she is doing? Nimel, Sarah, Audriane. All dead, all confused, all made to accuse me because Liora bleeds into forbidden root." The court wavered. It always wavered toward beauty before truth had time to stand. Savel seized the moment. Root blood does not reveal death. It bargains with it. The girl may not know she is doing it, but the result is the same. She is calling dead brides into your wedding hall. Liora tried to speak. The wreath tightened around her wrists until pain stole the words. Vaelric noticed. His sword moved an inch from its sheath. The roots punished Liora at once. She gasped, nearly falling into the flood. Vaelric froze. Ismera's mouth curved faintly. There it was. The leash. Every threat against her could be turned into pain inside Leora's body. Vaelric understood. So did Liora. His anger could hurt the wrong person. She forced herself to breathe and looked at the water around her knees. "Ask the gain." Vaelric's jaw tightened. "Liora, ask it," she whispered. "Not her. The death." The water stirred. Sira's ghost bowed her head. Vaelric turned from his mirror to the name glowing in the altar. The restraint cost him. Liora could see it in the rigid line of his shoulders. Who gained from Serave's death? The river water rose in a thin column. Inside it, the broken silver thread appeared again. One end floated toward Vaelric's chest. The other had been tied around a raven stone and drawn into Ismera's mourning necklace. The dead women whispered together. Another path cut. The silver thread turned black, then vanished into Ismera's bridal crown. The crown pulsed. Vaelric's wolf shadow flickered behind him, larger now, awake enough to snarl once before sinking back into darkness. Ismera's eyes filled with sudden fury. Enough. She reached beneath her veil and drew out a small blade of black glass. Sable Pallet. Milady. Silence. For the first time, the court heard command under the bride's sweetness. Ismera sliced her own palm and pressed the blood against the bridal crown. Every raven stone on her broken necklace flared black. The Widow Wreath convulsed. Liora screamed as the roots drove deeper around her wrists, not cutting flesh, but seeking something under it. The floodwater turned dark. Sarah's ghost vanished. Nimmerless' name dimmed. Lady Odrian's smoke face tore apart like ash in wind. Vaelric stepped toward Liora despite the warning. The wreath tightened again. He stopped with murder in his eyes and helplessness in his hands. Ismera smiled through her own blood. "Bring the weak girl to the root crypt," she said. "Let us see what her blood reveals when buried properly." The marble beneath Liora cracked open. Black roots rose from below, wrapping around her ankles. And from under the grave altar, a child's voice whispered. She was born from the grave they failed to close. The child's whisper split the wedding hall colder than any scream. Every black root in the marble paused. Even Ismera stopped smiling. Liora hung half-kneeling above the cracked grave altar, wrists bound by the widow wreath, ankles caught in roots rising from below. The water around her had turned dark, full of floating funeral petals and torn strips of widow silk. Pain blurred the edges of the room, but the child's voice had cut through it cleanly. Not the voice of a living child. Not exactly dead either. Something buried before it had been named. Vaelric's eyes moved to the broken altar. Who spoke? High Mourner Savel's lips parted, then closed. That silence answered too much. Ismera turned sharply toward him. "Do not." The command was soft. Savel obeyed it before he remembered the king stood there. Vaelric saw. So did Liora. The roots around her wrists pulsed, and a memory pushed upward through the black water. Not a full vision, only pieces. A winter graveyard, a woman's hand clawing from soil, white lilies laid too early, a baby's cry smothered beneath chapel bells, a priest saying fever while root vines drank blood from an open grave. Liora gasped. Her mother, not as she remembered her, pale, tired, kind enough to give away bread she could not spare. This woman was younger, bleeding, half-buried, one hand curled protectively around a newborn wrapped in grey cloth. The memory broke before Liora could reach it. She came back shaking. "My mother," she whispered. Ismera's face sharpened. "Your mother was a grave servant who died of weakness." "No," Leora's voice scraped. "She was buried before she died." A horrified murmur went through the court. Savel lifted his hands. Root memory distorts grief. The girl is inventing wounds to feed the wreath. Vaelric did not look at him. Why was her mother buried in Ravencairn soil? Savel's throat moved. Ismera answered instead. "Many servants are buried beneath royal ground. It is mercy." The roots tightened around Leora's ankles. The child's voice whispered again from under the altar. "Not mercy. Hiding." The black water rose. For one heartbeat, Liora saw beneath the floor. Root crypts twisting below Ravencairn Keep, filled not with honored dead, but with women whose names had been removed from marriage lists, bloodline records, and moon-bond trials. Some were noble. Some were servants. Some had no coffin at all. At the center was an old grave sealed with silver nails. Her mother's grave, the one that had failed to stay shut. Leora's breath broke. That was why grave root had curled around her finger as a child, not because she carried death, because death had recognized what survived it. Ismera stepped closer. bridal crown pulsing black. "Do you hear her, my king? She belongs to the crypt. Even the roots say so." Vaelric's wolf shadow rose behind him, larger than before, amber eyes fixed on the roots holding Liora. "The roots say she survived what someone buried." Ysmera's smile thinned. For a breath, the whole balanced on that sentence. Then Savel threw black powder into the water. The flood hissed purple. The Widow Wreath convulsed. Liora cried out as the roots around her ankles dragged her downward. The cracked marble widened beneath her knees. Cold air breathed up from the root crypt, carrying the smell of wet soil and old bones. Vaelric surged forward. The wreath punished her at once. Roots dug into her wrists. Her vision flashed white. "Stop," she choked. He froze, every muscle locked against the need to tear her free. Ysmera saw his restraint and used it. "Your compassion will kill her," she whispered. "Let the mourner take her below. If she is innocent, the roots will release her." Liora almost laughed through the pain. Nothing taken below by Savel returned innocent, or returned at all. Vaelric's voice was low. "No one takes her out of my sight." Savel bowed. "Then witness the descent here." He struck the grave altar with his black mourning staff. The marble opened like a mouth. Roots pulled Liora waist deep into the floor. The court recoiled. Vaelric took one step and stopped himself before the wreath could tear her apart. The effort made his wolf shadow snarl silently behind him. Liora looked at him through the blur of pain. For once, she did not see only the Alpha King. She saw a man whose power was useless in the one way that mattered most. He could kill everyone in the hall. He could not save her by force. So she did what weak girls learn to do when no one could carry them. She endured one more breath, then another. The roots around her wrists pulsed with dead women's voices. "Not down. Listen down." Liora stopped fighting the pull. Vaelric saw the change. "Liora, I hear them," she whispered. The root crypt below opened in her mind. She felt the buried women not as ghosts now, but as roots braided together. Each death tied to gain, each gain tied to Ysmera's crown. And beneath them all her mother's grave beat like a hidden heart. Liora pressed her bleeding wrists against the Widow Wreath. "Show me who buried her." The hall went silent. The roots stopped dragging. Ysmera's face emptied. Under the altar, silver nails snapped one by one. A woman's voice rose from the crypt, weak but furious. "Ask the bride why she feared my daughter before she could walk. Ask the bride why she feared my daughter before she could walk." The voice rose from beneath the altar like breath through wet soil. Liora stopped sinking. Roots held her waist deep in the broken marble, but they no longer dragged. The Widow Wreath stayed wrapped around her wrists, black vines slick with her blood, its funeral lilies now dark at the center. Beneath her, the root crypt waited open, cold and breathing. Above her, Lady Ysmera Voss had gone perfectly still. That was how guilt looked on the powerful. Not trembling. Stillness. Vaelric's eyes moved from the altar to his bride. "Answer it." Ysmera's lips parted, then curved with wounded disbelief. "My king, you ask me to answer a corpse?" "No," he said. "I ask you to answer the woman you buried." A sound moved through the court. Not quite horror. Not yet judgment. They were still looking for a way to make this less dangerous than it was. High Mourner Savel found it first. The voice may not be her mother. Root crypts keep many dead. Grief borrows familiar shapes. Liora closed her eyes. The voice below had been faint, broken by years under grave root, but she knew it. She had heard that same gentleness humming over wash basins, whispering fever prayers over thin blankets, telling her that weak bones were still bones and could still hold a soul upright. "Mother," she whispered. The roots answered. A memory rose through the water at the broken altar. A woman stood in a low servant chamber with a newborn in her arms. She had dark hair, tired eyes, and blood still staining the hem of her nightdress. Beside the door, a midwife knelt, pale with fear. Outside, bells rang for a royal mourning rite. Then Usmera entered, not as bride, younger, beautiful already, dressed in pale mourning silk. Her gaze fell on the child, Liora, newborn and silent. Too silent. The baby did not cry. Instead, one tiny hand opened toward the floor, and beneath the cradle, a dead root pushed through stone and curled around her finger like recognition. Usmera saw it. Her face changed. "Widow root," she whispered. Liora's mother stepped back. "She is only a child." "She is a door," Ismera said, and doors open. The memory shifted. Ismera stood before Savel in the crypt chapel. If that blood lives, every useful death will find a mouth. Savel's face was younger, but his fear was the same. The mother? Bury her as fever. The child is weak. Let the court teach her to doubt every breath. The memory cracked. Liora came back with a sob caught in her throat. The hall did not speak. Even the nobles who had laughed at her trembling hands could not look fully at her now. Vaelric's wolf shadow rose higher behind him, its amber eyes fixed on Ysmera. "You knew what she was." Ysmera's face hardened. "I knew what her blood could become. A witness, a weapon," Ysmera snapped. The word revealed more than she meant. Liora lifted her head, pain shaking through her body. "I was a baby. You were a future ruin." Vaelric took one step. The wreath tightened on Leora's wrists at once. He stopped. Ysmera smiled faintly through her fear. "There it is. Your strength, my king, always stopping where grief tells you to stop." Liora felt the roots listening. Ysmera had tied too much into them. Deaths, gain, fear, crown, bond. If Vaelric attacked, Liora would be the throat the roots closed first. So Liora spoke before he could spend her blood for his anger. "Ask the gain." Vaelric's jaw worked. "You can barely breathe." "Then ask before I can't." His eyes held hers. There was fury in him. Not at her. For her. But he did not make it her burden. He turned to the open altar. "Who gained from burying her mother?" The crypt answered with a low groan. Roots unfolded beneath Ysmera's bridal crown, invisible until silver light traced them. One line ran from Leora's mother's grave to Savel's black mourning staff. Another ran from the staff to Ysmera's ravenstone necklace. The final line ran toward Vaelric's chest, but stopped short of touching him, cut and knotted around the bridal crown. The dead women whispered. Silence before bond. Vaelric went still. Liora felt those words land inside him. The bond again. Not awakened, not named, only circled by graves. Ysmera's calm finally cracked. Enough. She tore a second ravenstone from her necklace and crushed it between her teeth. Black smoke poured from her mouth. The root lines vanished. The dead women screamed once, then dimmed. Savel seized the opening. He slammed his staff into the altar and spoke a burial command in the old mourner tongue. The roots around Leora's waist tightened. This time, they dragged hard. Vaelric lunged and stopped himself too late. The wreath cut into Leora's wrists. Blood fell into the crypt. The roots below opened like hands. Liora dropped another inch into darkness. Her mother's voice rose beneath her, desperate now. "Do not pull her up." Vaelric froze. Leora's heart twisted. The voice continued, weak but clear. "Make the bride come down. Make the bride come down." The words rose from the root crypt and struck the wedding hall harder than any scream. Vaelric froze with one hand extended toward Liora, his wolf shadow trembling behind him, amber eyes burning in helpless fury. The roots had dragged her nearly to the waist now. Black vines crossed her ribs. The widow wreath cut into her wrists, drinking blood in slow pulses. But Leora's mother had not told him to save her. She had told him to bring Ysmera down. Lady Ysmera Voss stood above the broken altar in bridal white, blood at her throat, black smoke fading from her lips. For the first time, she looked not like a wronged bride or a grieving noblewoman. She looked like someone standing too close to a grave she had hoped would stay closed. Vaelric turned toward her. "Go down." Ismera's eyes widened. Then she laughed softly. "You cannot mean that." "I do. The crypt is forbidden ground. You seem familiar with it." The court went silent. High Mourner Savel stepped forward. "Majesty, no bride of Ravencairn descends into Root Crypt before vows. It is an ill sign." Vaelric did not look at him. "So is a poisoned cup under my wedding altar." Savel fell silent. Liora tried to breathe through the roots tightening at her ribs. Below her, the crypt breathed cold air against her skin, smelling of wet earth, funeral wax, and buried lilies. She could feel her mother somewhere beneath the floor. Not whole, not alive, but present enough to fight, present enough to fear Ismera. "Why?" Liora whispered. The roots trembled. "Why does she have to come down?" Her mother's voice answered from below. "Because gain hides above, proof is buried below." Ismera's face sharpened. "This is absurd. A corpse bargains for spectacle, and you all listen because a servant bleeds prettily?" Vaelric's eyes went cold. "Choose your next words carefully." Ismera looked at him then, truly looked, and saw what Liora saw. The Alpha King was no longer asking whether something was wrong. He was deciding how much of his court had been built to keep him blind. That made him dangerous. So Ismera changed shape again. Her anger softened into pain. Her shoulders lowered. Her voice trembled with just enough grief to tempt mercy. "I have loved this kingdom through every funeral," she said. "I stood beside grieving mothers. I wrapped dead brides in silk. I watched you lose every chance at bond and still remained. And now you ask me to crawl into a crypt because a root-blood servant dreams of her mother?" Some nobles shifted. Liora felt it. Pity turning. Not fully. Enough. The wreath tightened in warning. Vaelric did not turn to the court. "Did you love them before or after they died?" Ismera's mask cracked. "Only for a heartbeat." But it was enough. The root crypt groaned. A black vine shot up from the altar crack and wrapped around Ismera's ankle. She gasped. Savel lifted his staff. Vaelric's sword flashed toward him. "Try," the king said. Savel stopped. The vine pulled. Ismera grabbed the edge of the altar, nails scraping black marble. "Vaelric." His name sounded intimate in her mouth, claiming. Liora hated that it hurt. Not because she wanted him, not yet, because Ismera had used every kind of closeness as a weapon. Grief, service, mourning, patience, almost love. She had stood near the king for years while burying women who might have woken what she could not. The vine pulled harder. Ismera fell to one knee. The bridal crown tilted. Under it, thin black roots appeared, woven through the gold-like hair. The court saw. A murmure rose. Ismera's hand flew to the crown. Too late. The widow wreath around Liora's wrists opened one black flower. Inside the flower glowed a tiny scene. A nursery, dark grave, a woman half-buried, a newborn wrapped in grey cloth, and Ismera standing over them with Savel behind her. Liora's mother spoke from the crypt. "She feared my daughter because widow root blood does not mourn death. It follows profit through death." The vision sharpened. Young Ismera looked down at newborn Liora and whispered, "If that child lives, she will find every path I cut." Savel asked, "Then kill the child too?" Ismera shook her head. "No, weakness is safer. Let her live as an omen. No one believes a trembling girl." The vision vanished. Liora went cold. Not from the crypt, from understanding. They had not spared her by mistake. They had designed her survival to become a cage. Weak Liora. Death touched Liora. A witness trained by cruelty to doubt her own sight. Vaelric's voice was very quiet. "You made her life a hiding place." Ismera's eyes blazed. "I made sure your kingdom survived the wrong bond." At that, every root stopped. Liora felt the words fall deep. Wrong bond. Not false bride. Not dead brides. Bond. Vaelric took one step toward her. What did you say? Ismera pressed both hands around the vine at her ankle, but it dragged her closer to the altar crack. You think a king's wolf should choose like a beast? One scent, one pulse, one root, blood girl born from a grave. A kingdom is not ruled by hunger. Leora's wrists burned. The wreath whispered through the dead women. She knew before the first death. Vaelric's wolf shadow lifted its head. For one breath, Liora felt something inside the hall shift toward her, not claim, not romance, but recognition too large and dangerous to name yet. Ismera saw it. Her face twisted. She tore the bridal crown from her hair and threw it toward the altar crack. The crown hit the roots above Liora and burst open. Black threads spilled from it like worms, each tied to a dead woman's name. Nimelle, Sarah, Audrienne, Corva. More. Too many. The roots around Leora's waist tightened and dragged her down to the edge of darkness. Vaelric's sword came up. Leora's mother cried from below, "Not the roots!" Liora understood too late. The crown was bait. If Vaelric cut the roots, he would cut through the dead women's proof. Liora forced her bleeding hands around the Widow Wreath. "Do not cut," she gasped. Vaelric stopped with the blade a hair from the vines. Ismera smiled through tears. Then the crypt pulled Liora under. For one heartbeat, the hall saw only her hands above the floor. Then even those vanished. And from below Ravencairn Keep, every dead bride began to sing. The dead brides sang beneath Ravencairn Keep. Their voices rose through root, stone, and black water, soft as funeral hymns and sharp as knives hidden in silk. The wedding hall above disappeared from Leora's sight, swallowed by the dark mouth of the crypt. For one breath, she fell through cold soil and tangled roots with the widow wreath bound around her wrists. Then the roots caught her, not gently, but not to kill. They held her suspended above a hollow chamber lit by pale root fire. Around her, the root crypt opened like the inside of an ancient heart. Black vines covered the walls. Silver nails pierced old coffins. Funeral lilies grew upside down from the ceiling, their white petals stained with purple poison at the edges. And everywhere, women stood among the roots. Nimelle Ash in her pale blue gown, Sarah Vey with riverweeds around her throat, Lady Audrienne with purple lips, Corva Dern with frost in her hair. Others Liora did not know, their faces half-shadowed by veils, their hands holding cut silver threads that once might have reached Vaelric's wolf breath. They were not peaceful. They were waiting. Leora's mother stood at the center of them, not whole, not living. Her body was made of root light and grave dark soil, one side of her face still beautiful, the other cracked by years beneath silver nails. But her eyes were the same eyes Liora remembered from childhood, tired, kind, and furious enough to keep breathing after death had failed to finish her. "Mother?" Liora whispered. Her mother reached for her, then stopped before touching the wreath. "They tied your blood to the proof," she said. "If I pull you free wrongly, the dead lose their names." Liora looked down. The black threads from Ismera's crown had followed her into the crypt. They wrapped around the wrists of every dead woman, then ran through the widow wreath, then into Leora's bleeding hands. She was not only trapped, she was the knot. Above them, the wedding hall shook. Vaelric's voice reached through the cracked altar like thunder muffled by earth. Liora. Her heart twisted at the sound. Not because she thought he could save her, because he sounded as if not saving her was tearing something open in him. Ismera's voice followed, distant but clear. "Cut the roots, my king. Prove you care more for the living girl than dead accusations." The dead brides went silent. Liora understood the trap. If Vaelric cut the roots, he could tear her free. He might even save her body. But the threads tied through the dead women would snap. Nimelle would become fever again. Sarah would become fog. Audrienne would become sleep. Her mother would become weakness. And Ismera would remain the grieving bride attacked by forbidden root. Liora closed her eyes, Weak girls survived by letting others decide what hurt less. She was done surviving that way. She lifted her bleeding wrists. "Do not cut." Above, the hall fell silent. Vaelric answered after one brutal breath. "Then tell me what to do." The dead women looked at her. No one had ever asked Liora that in a room full of power. Her mother's voice softened. "Widow, root blood does not command the dead. It names the prophet and follows it home." "Home where?" Her mother turned toward the far wall of the crypt. Roots peeled aside, revealing a door made of bridal crowns. Dozens of them. Silver, bone, pearl, blackthorn, gold. Each crown hung from a nail, and each nail pierced a strip of parchment bearing a woman's name. At the center, one empty nail waited beneath fresh black silk. Liora knew whose crown was meant to hang there. Usmeres. Not as punishment. As completion. She did not only kill to reach the king, Leora's mother said. She stored each death inside a crown, so every lost bond, thread would gather above her head. Liora looked at the dead women. "Why?" Namel answered. "To imitate what she could not awaken." Sarah lifted her cut silver thread. "To build a bride from endings." Lady Odrian's purple lips parted. "To make his wolf mistake many silenced women for one chosen mate." Liora went cold. Above, Vaelric must have heard, because a sound tore through the stone, not a human sound, but his wolf shadow snarling so deeply the roots trembled. Usmera cried out, "Lies!" But the crypt no longer listened to her. Leora's mother raised one hand. The door of crowns opened. Behind it stood Ysmera's true bridal crown, the one she had thrown into the altar. It floated in darkness, split open, black threads writhing from it into the names of the dead. At its heart pulsed a hollow silver space, shaped like an absent bond. Liora felt the Widow Wreath tighten. It wanted that hollow. No, not wanted. Recognized it as theft. Ask the gain. Her mother whispered. Leora's voice shook. Who gained from every cut thread? The dead brides answered together. Usmerabos. The crown screamed. Above the crypt, the wedding hall cracked with the sound. Liora felt the proof rise through the roots, carrying names, cups, river water, poison pins, false mourning rites, buried mothers, and every thread cut before Vaelric's wolf could follow it. The roots lifted Liora upward, not free. Witnessing, she rose through the cracked altar in a storm of black vines and silver names. The court staggered back as she emerged from the floor, wrists bound by the Widow Wreath, eyes filled with root fire, dead brides standing like shadows behind her. Vaelric stood with his sword lowered. He had not cut. He had waited. His restraint had preserved the proof. Ysmera saw the dead behind Liora and stepped back. Too late. The bridal crown rose from the crypt and hovered above her head, split open for all to see. Inside it, every stolen bond thread writhed like a severed vein. Liora looked at Vaelric. Then at the court. She did not wait to become his bride, she said. She built herself from the deaths of every woman his wolf almost chose. The Widow Wreath unwrapped from Leora's wrists. It flew across the hall and closed around Ysmera again. This time, not her throat. Her crown. The Widow Wreath closed around Ysmera's crown. Not gently. Black roots pierced the gold, the pearls, the raven stones, and the hidden threads woven beneath them. The bridal crown screamed in 100 stolen voices. Every silver bond thread inside it thrashed. Not alive, not dead, trapped between the women who had carried them and the bride who had stolen their endings. Usmera fell to her knees. For the first time, no one moved to help her. The court had seen too much. Nimel's poisoned cup, Sarah's river death, Audrienne's false asleep, the hidden crowns in the crypt, the dead bride standing behind Liora like a mourning army. Vaelric Dravane stood at the center of the broken wedding hall with his sword lowered. His wolf shadow rose behind him, larger than before, its amber eyes fixed on the wreath around Ysmera's crown. It did not look at Ysmera as a mate. It looked at her as a grave thief. Ysmera clawed at the roots. Vaelric, please. The name landed in the hall with everything she had once used it to claim. Patience. Mourning. Loyalty. A bride who had waited while every other woman died. Vaelric's face did not soften. Do not use my name as if you did not bury every woman who might have spoken it with truth. Her lips trembled. I protected you. The dead brides hissed. Ysmera turned toward the court, blood streaking her white gown. I protected all of you. A king's wolf cannot be allowed to chase every fragile thread that stirs in grief. A kingdom needs a bride who can stand, a bride who can rule, not weak girls, not fevered women, not river-drowned alliance daughters, not root-blood servants born from graves. Liora felt the words strike old places. Weak. Servant. Born from graves. The Widow Wreath tightened at Ysmera's crown, and the stolen threads burned brighter. Vaelric looked at Liora. He did not step toward her. That mattered. The roots, the dead, the proof, everything in the hall still passed through her blood. If he moved too quickly, if he made her rescue into possession, the court would remember only that the Alpha King had chosen a new woman while the old bride screamed. Liora understood. So did he. Liora Fen, he said, voice low but carrying through the hall. What does the wreath require? No one had ever asked her what judgment should look like. Not the priests. Not the court. Not the women who blamed her for omens. Liora looked at Ysmera, then at the dead brides behind her. Their faces held rage, yes, but also exhaustion. They did not want spectacle. They wanted the deaths returned to their true names. The gains must be unbound, Liora said. The Widow Wreath pulsed. Vaelric turned to the court. Then no vow will be spoken today. No bridal crown will remain sealed. No death that brought Ysmera Voss closer to my throne will be called fate until Widow Root Witness has named it. High Mourner Savel tried to crawl backward. One black root snapped around his ankle. Liora looked at him, and no mourner who carried poison will bury another woman. Savel's face collapsed. Ysmera's eyes filled with hatred. You think you are merciful? No, Liora said. I am tired. The simple truth silenced the hall more deeply than anger could have. The Widow Wreath lifted Ysmera's crown from her head. Ysmera screamed as the black roots tore the stolen threads free. Not from her flesh, from the false life she had built around it. One by one, the threads flew back to the dead women. Nimel ash touched hers and became brighter. Serave's river weeds fell from her throat. Lady Odrian's purple lips softened. Corvidern stepped from the frost around her hair and opened her eyes fully for the first time. The dead brides did not vanish. They stood witnessed. Ysmera collapsed, crownless, her white gown stained with root-black blood. Vaelric's wolf shadow moved toward her. Leora's breath caught, but the wolf did not bite. It lowered its massive head to the broken crown and exhaled. Amber light passed through the hollow space where Ysmera had tried to build herself from stolen endings. The crown cracked once, twice, then split into dust and dead petals. The stolen bond threads dissolved. Vaelric staggered. Liora saw the pain hit him, years of almost recognition, years of silence, years of a wolf made to doubt its own breath. His hand pressed to his chest, but he did not fall. His wolf shadow turned, not to Ysmera, to Liora. The entire hall saw it. Liora took one step back. She was not afraid of the wolf. She was afraid of what the court would make of that look. Ysmera had murdered women to force a bond. Liora would not let their deaths become the stage for another claim. Vaelric understood before she spoke. He lifted one hand, stopping his own wolf shadow. It obeyed, slowly, with effort. That restraint shook the court more than a roar. The Alpha King's wolf wanted to go to her. The Alpha King did not allow it to take what had not been offered. Not today, Liora whispered. Vaelric bowed his head once. Not today. The dead brides lowered their eyes, not in disappointment, but approval. Leora's mother rose last from the root crypt, pale and broken, but smiling through the grief of years stolen underground. She touched Leora's cheek with fingers made of root light. "You were never death-touched," her mother whispered. "You were death's witness." Liora closed her eyes. When she opened them, her mother was gone. The widow wreath returned to Leora's hands. It was lighter now. The white funeral lilies were no longer black at the center. Their petals glowed faintly silver, each one marked with a name that had been restored. Vaelric faced the court. "Lady Ismera Voss will live," he said. "She will name every cup, every river, every false fever, every grave she profited from. High Mourner Savel will stand beside her until the root says his silence is empty." Ismera looked up, horrified. "You leave me to the dead?" "No," Liora said. "To the truth." The wolves in the hall lowered their heads. "Not to the bride, not to the king, to the names glowing in the wreath." At dawn, the wedding candles were extinguished one by one. The grave altar remained split open, but no longer hungry. Beneath Ravencairn Keep, the root crypt breathed easier, its dead no longer pressed into silence. Liora stood where she had first been forced to carry an omen. Her wrists were cut, her dress was torn, her body shook with exhaustion. But no one called her weak. Vaelric stood beside her, close enough that his shadow touched the hem of her grey dress, far enough that choice remained alive between them. "My wolf knows you," he said quietly. Liora looked at the widow wreath in her hands. "Then let it know why first." His eyes held hers. "I will wait." Outside, the first bells of the broken wedding rang across Ravencairn. Not marriage bells, witness bells. And Liora Fen, the servant girl blamed for bringing death, carried the widow wreath down the aisle again, not to bury the dead, but to name who had lived from them.